Today I'm going to do a teardown on an articulated dump truck. Not a full-size one, it's an RC. It's the Huina 1568, I believe is the model for this one. And both this one and the die-cast Masters equivalent have the same problem, which is that they are originally a rear-wheel drive only truck. And this is a six-wheel vehicle. Real life, I believe they're 6x6, but in this, only the rear pair of wheels are driven at all. And those are locked together, no differential, tires are not glued, the traction, there's no tread on here. Traction is terrible. This thing cannot get around in dirt whatsoever. These ladders in the front certainly don't help. And when it's not just digging the nose in, the lack of suspension and just general setup in the back here makes sure that only usually one wheel is actually in contact. So what I'm going to do is tear this down, and I'm not going to put it back together today, but I do have, I think, most of the parts figured out. This is sort of based on a combination of the actual designs from both the Volvo and the Bell trucks. Yeah, used some of their marketing material and took a look at how they were doing it and then simplified that down. So I have a piece here. This is sort of the equivalent of the walking arm, I believe, and these wheels out of the way, it'll come in the middle here, attach right about here, and should provide a pretty good pivot point with a pair of bearings at the top. It also has a pair of motors, so each of the back wheels will be individually driven, and I'm not sure if I'll put in some sort of all-wheel drive system or if it will just be using the same signal. Potentially do pairs on either side, allow a little bit of a skid steer effect on that, but I'm not sure how well that will work with the articulation. So primarily a programming thing. I can swap that out later, so I might do that in software. I'm going to move a few things out of the way. We've got some of the boards here, and then start taking that apart. And this replacement, if everything works correctly, it's going to fit a pair of N20 gear motors. You can get these in all sorts of voltage and RPM, anything from 3 to 12 volts, and like 8 to 3000 RPM, and so torque ratio is all over. You can pick what you want on that. I've got some adapters here for WPL wheels. These are just some that I had laying around, and I think I might get some different wheels for the final version. The last thing to figure out really is fixing the motors in here. I will probably just put a little piece of foam on the inside, and once it slides in, it'll be pretty secure. But maybe I'll print a cap to go over the end. Anyways, it's going to be one of those on either side. These are about 5 hours to print, although I have a 0.2mm nozzle on there right now. Maybe not the best thing for this project. But yeah, these take a little while. I think they will work pretty well. So prototype, and then got some MOSFETs here. Get out of the way. Alright. I have cracked this particular truck open before, so some of these screws have been removed. Only have to do a few of them, and it's definitely not, I don't want to call it a bad design by any means. The way they packed everything in here is pretty decent, but as far as actually putting power down on the ground, it does struggle. So the goal, I think, I'm just going to gut everything and replace all of the electronics. Not too worried about keeping the dumping mechanism or any of that. I think it will be easier if I just get rid of everything, completely empty out this section, and then that will give me quite a bit of room. going to use a pair of dual drivers. I've got a couple different ones. I don't recall the chips off the top of my head, so I'm not going to say something incorrect, but I've got a few different options. One of them's in the DRV88 family. I think I need a larger screwdriver for that. I've got a few different options for the drivers, but two dual drivers, one for either side, so that I can potentially drive them separately, and then link those up. And they actually sort of really clever how they did the wiring. One of these wires attaching the cab to the bed, both of these are actually cables with 3 or 4 wires in them, just cut to length. And one of them is actually active, so it carries power and signal for the back. It's a pretty sweet design, but I do have a few complaints with it, primarily the traction, and the lack of suspension really kind of did it in on that count. I think if they had given this suspension, the rear wheel drive may have been viable, but it's just hard to keep those back wheels on the ground. This pin through, really actually quite good. It should be pretty strong, but then it relies on a gear. I kind of want to swap this out for a servo. A good like 14 kilo servo. Put it in there. Something that'll take a couple amps, but if the steering depends on the articulation, because there's really no room to move the front wheels, then I want to be able to continue to articulate when there's quite a bit of a load on there, even if I am not the most articulate. Alright, so I was saying about the cable, there's one here unused, and then this one actually the wires come out and go into this driver. So this is going to be a dual driver, and these are not poorly put together. Good solder, capacitors on each motor, so not half bad. I've got a motor in here for the dumping mechanism, and that goes through sort of this wheel, and that's going to push up on an arm here. I think I might replace this with a linear actuator. I have a stepper on a linear rail as well. I'm not entirely sure how I would put a stepper driver in here and actually drive that, so maybe I'll do that on the Die-Cast Masters one. But for the moment, this is just teardown. So keep going with the circuit board. That's nice. This is a plugged board, so there is not actually a driver on here. It's also sort of interesting. Probably would have run the signal, and by probably would have, I mean I probably will, run the signal through this cable, and then actually put the driver for these motors back here just to reduce the length of the motor cables. Because technically, with this setup, they have the motor cables all going through this. You've got some fairly thin wires. There are 4 of them combined, so you're getting some interaction between the wires. The length of the wires is definitely longer than I would like, but it looks like a heavy enough board for what they're doing. Its inner traces are a little smaller. It's good pads on the outside. I will applaud them for using plugs. That definitely makes my life that much easier. And this dumping mechanism is not bad as well. The way everything fits in here is pretty good. Actually, quite a bit of room, but where I want to put the bar that will go between these is going to be sort of smack through the middle of this. Would have to punch through. all of the working mechanical parts here, so that's just not going to happen unless I take a few things out. It looks like they have 2 or 3 screws on each of these, which again, certainly not bad. Everything's in here pretty securely. This is rear axle. I'm definitely keeping this to use something else, something where the lack of differential is not going to matter, because this is just no flexibility in there. So press fit. Having pulled off the middle pair of wheels, these are definitely press fit onto the axle, so limited in the amount of torque they can deliver. I'm going to go with a hex in these N20 motors. So I actually have a couple adapters on here. This is a 5mm hex, or a little bit less. This turned out to be too small. So the D shaft, which is either 2 or 3mm, and then 5mm hex. That should let me put on some of the wheels I had laying around. I also have one with a 12mm hex for your standard 110, 116 wheels. I think those are the only screws on the second gearbox, but it is going to be attached by that arm as well. So maybe this will be easier if I get it up here. I think if it works, this might be a decent pivot point for the linear actuator, but I'm worried that this is going to be too far back, and I'd be better off having the actuator pushing in this direction. I guess I'll have to look that up. Maybe it should be pushing this way, and then it can sort of take advantage of being closer to the pivot point here. I'll have to look into that. So this comes out, and so far all of these gearboxes in these Huina toys have been pretty well greased up. Not sure what kind of grease they're using exactly, but some kind of clear grease just all over everything. So I expect them to last a little while. I don't know what the ratio is on this. You can definitely back drive the motor, so I would like a little bit higher of a gear ratio on that one, I think. Grease all over this, just sort of oozing out, and probably take this one apart. I want to see how the gears are laid out in there. There's a fair chance that this will never go back together. It's for the sake of science. Screwdriver's way too small. And this should come off. Looks like there's a little pin in there, but the screws are off. That's going to come out. Interesting. So it looks like this is not really secured in any way. It's just on a shaft, which must go through some kind of gear on the inside. This does not really want to open. Usually a warning sign. Going to choose to ignore it. Alright. Not bad. So there's a worm gear on here, which will make it that much harder to back drive. So actually I like that. this is all a little flimsy for what it's supposed to be doing, but it looks lined up well enough. Packed full of grease. I don't know how visible that is, but it's just a mess in there. So you got 1, 2, 3 stages. This one's interesting. It's just, I think that's just a spacer in the middle there, and then of course the worm starting it off. See if I can put this back together correctly. It's pretty close. Something's definitely not sitting right at the end there. Looks like there's a hole for each of the gearing, the posts that go through each set of gears. And this last one of these last two is not fitting quite right. This tall one must be, or everything else would be out of whack. Of course, you can't really turn this. It's going to be a nuisance to get back together. Let's see. Oh, okay, so there's a stop on here. I think if that is out of place, then you're going to have some trouble. Sort of feels like that's where the resistance is coming from. Move that all the way over. That fits together much better. Okay, so noted, there's a little stop on that last gear. If that's out of place, you're not really going to be able to get this back together. Keep an eye on that. Probably better just not to take the gearbox apart, but and these things, as far as I can tell, only use 1 or 2 types of screw. Most of them seem pretty interchangeable. Looks like there's maybe some slightly smaller ones for the gearbox and some slightly larger ones. There's some of these larger headed ones were used to actually hold these down to the frame. But as far as holding parts together, it seems to be pretty much the same screw throughout. So, except for these two. The boards for these, I actually have a couple laying around. The boards aren't bad either. A couple of, I have to look this up, I'm going to say it's a 2 amp, 3 amp driver chip. This is a dual driver, single driver. This is from one of the wheel loaders, the 1520 or 1530, depending on where you find it. Yeah, 3 channels, driver, LEDs are sort of pulled off of the driver outputs and then come back through a shared resistor. And I actually have a schematic drawn up of this, so I may do a teardown on that board. This is the microcontroller from it. They rubbed all the numbers off of the controller, but not the drivers. So I'll happily swap out their controller, continue using the driver chips. Those are the expensive part anyways. So this is the, I guess, the drivetrain, such as it is, not much of a train, and dumping mechanism. This, again, is just an arm on a wheel, so as this goes around, it's going to force back the truck to come up. Speaking of, pull this back up. So I plan on keeping these, and I think I'll actually keep them on and in place because they will provide some good back and forth support. And then the hinge on the back here appears to be pretty important. Rear lights are just screwed on, so tearing things down, then I can take those off. Still got a few more parts to print for this, so it's not going back together today. This is just an exploratory, documentary teardown, so that hopefully we can figure out what's going on in here and turn it into just a 6x4, if not 6x6. These lights don't want to come off. I'm not sure if that screw was the important part or not. But these cables have some stress relief on top, which, again, just a really nice little touch there. There's definitely some thought put into building this. Just wish they had put in some suspension springs. Would have made it that much more usable. Hopefully, with these screws out, this whole panel will come off. Okay. Okay. So that actually allows the cable to come out without taking it apart. So that's non-destructive. It's nice. In the back here, still not entirely sure how this fits together, but it looks like the rear light part might be trapped by the rear hinge, which is just a screw. I'm going to leave that in place because I'm not really interested in taking the bed off. I think I can. This is the linear actuator that I have. I accidentally left it extended. I'm sort of thinking if I can just fit that in. I can fit that in just sort of like there. And that looks like it might actually work. Then I can put the other end up here, and I think I might need a longer actuator. I hadn't measured it very well when I bought this one. Just wanted to see if it will work. So might be one for the parts bin. But anyways. So I'm going to anchor that around these sort of posts. Don't know what those are. Ladders, maybe? And then back here. And that should work alongside these to push the whole thing up. Plenty of space for that. I also could put in a linear rail here and then an arm. That would be actually a little bit trickier because it would have to go sort of, I'd have to bend as it went back. Yeah, that would be interesting. I would need a rail on the top as well, maybe. I don't know if that would work as well. And the rail came with a stepper, whereas the actuator is just reverse the polarity and sucks it back in. So let's take off this gear. This is the spot where I want to put in a servo. I feel like this gear is pretty chunky, but it's likely to slip or skip. The servo is going to be able to hold its place pretty well. Bring the cab back down. So the cab, again, there's a good size gear in there actually, so maybe this will stay in place. Don't know. Can't really get that to slip pushing on it by hand. That's a good sign. I have it lined up in the right spot? Anyways, I have to just make sure I have that in the right place and everything and test it out. Actually feels like it might work. I definitely had it upside down. So there's one screw here, appears to be holding a lot of the tab on, and then 2, 4, and maybe some in the battery compartment. They do, on the other models, really like to hide screws in the battery compartments. Nothing in there, so it's clear. Nice clicky power switches. Don't think that's actually getting down to the screw. They almost, if this wasn't a motor, reminds me of a Grove breakout board. You could almost just get a plug and play ecosystem, slap it in this thing, make it go. But I am partial to the Pololu drivers. They have a whole variety of different amperages, and single and dual. Mostly brushed drivers. I think they might have some brushless as well, but I haven't really gotten into those. Very easy to control, so I'll put them on all sorts of Arduinos, PICs, AVRs, etc. Not sure what electronics will be going in this yet, but it has 3 motors. Three separate motor channels. If you consider the back 4 to be 2 pairs, and then the front here, the articulation is actually a motor sticking down into those gears. Pluggable board, which is nice. If I can find my tweezers. Again, I'm not too worried about putting these back in exactly the same spot, but just take a peek here. So, battery, power switch. This looks like LEDs, maybe? I'll have to trace that one out a little bit better. Yeah, that's definitely the power switch under there. So, some wire that gets activated in off mode. Articulation motor. This is going to be your headlight LEDs. This appears to be I'm not exactly sure where that one goes. Likely going out the back here, but it's not the right colors for that. Anyways, pull this last motor. Being super rough with this board, but these are pretty basic boards. See what drivers it has on it. May or may not be worth keeping. Okay, so the back cable is actually soldered down. It's a little bit of a nuisance. They did good with the strain relief on here. Some thought was put into that. Get this out. take off a couple of these. There we go. And then I don't think that will come out with the boot that's on it, which means it won't come out with the plug either. That is going to have to be cut or desoldered. In the interest of figuring out how it went back together, I'm going to cut it down here with the colored wires. You can use their color code as reference later. Alright, so that's one of the cables. I don't know why I took that out. Actually, probably the best place to keep it. And power-wise, probably would like to send... I don't know if it would be better to twist the two power cables and send them both down the same side, and then data down the other, or one power down and one power back. I think I'm going to go with power on one side and data on the other. I'm definitely not going to try and stuff 4 connectors into this. I'm just going to go with two on either side at most. Anyways, so headlights here. Headlights are screwed in. It's pretty neat. These things are surprisingly modular. Didn't really expect it to be quite so individual component heavy, but here's your headlight assembly. This is just one LED hot glued in there, but a bit of chrome plastic. Yeah. Easy to take out, swap with a different light if you like. Leave these out because that will get the wires out of the way. On the side here is a fuel port, looks like. If you wanted to put a charging port in, this would be the spot. There's actually kind of plenty of room in here for a battery. If you wanted to permanently install a battery, this would be a good spot. Stick the cable in there and sort of wire it down through. Looks like there's 3 screws to take off the cabin. I don't really know if I'm going to do that yet because there's no electronics in there. It's good detail in there, but not much else, so I'll leave that on. Okay, so this screw does not look like it goes through into the cabin, so that's probably just for this. There's 2 screws for the cabin and 1 screw for the air filter muffler. Just guessing there. Whatever this box is. Fake ladder back here. Probably paint that up. All the other ladders appear to be painted. This one clips in. So this one I actually sort of want to take out. It's super in the way. Just clip that out and then find something to put in there instead. Headlights, logo. Looks like the logo melted into place, so you can take that off without too much trouble. Just sort of sand it down on the inside here and then you should be able to pry it off on the outside. Alright, so now we are on to the bottom of the cap, and this is where all of the good stuff is. Also the speakers. I really do not like that all of these have speakers in them. I know that they are toys. Some people like the sound effects, but I think it is a little bit much. So this sucker's coming out. Find something else to use this in. I'm sure. Putting the power switch on a board is a little interesting. And then it looks like bringing it down I'm not entirely sure what that is for. 3.3 volts, huh? Almost looks like they have logic voltage going even when it's turned off, which would be pretty terrible for the battery, so I hope that's not the case, but I'm not sure what's going on here. Because each of these goes to one pad, so it's going to switch between pairs, and these were both going the same way. I'll have to trace that out later. I've not traced out this particular chip yet. So. Moving on to the rear gearbox, 6 screws. Looks like 2 of these might be empty. There's at least 4 screws on here, and then it's held in, not through these holes, so it's not clear if it's this mechanism. Nope, those are micro switches. Okay, so those are limit switches. That's actually nice. There's some switch limiting going on there, and it looks like these would hold it in. Only one of these is populated. So there's only 4 screws in here. I'm not sure which ones are holding it down and which ones are holding it closed. So there's a solid chance that this accidentally opens. I'm trying to take it off. Okay. So it looks like the front and back. So they did 2 holding it closed, 2 holding it down. So that's alright. So front and back, hold it down. So then this actually shows the axle for these wheels. It's going to be another press fit pair. Kind of a pain to get off. Probably not going to do that at the moment. End up punching my soldering iron and throwing stuff across the desk. So these unexplained wires are coming down to the limit switches. If I put in a servo, it's not going to be as much of an issue. Just going to software limit it on the servo. All in all, again, fairly impressed with the electronics on this. I've noticed that their motors tend to burn out and the gearboxes will crack. I think some of the gears will crack in the gearboxes, so I think that is probably the weak spot. But the chassis, not bad. I'm pretty sure this is all ABS, and the gears look like nylon. Got a screw stuck in here. There are a pair of additional screws. If you're having trouble at all getting the cap apart, there are ones in the front and back here. Then there's also a pair of additional screws under the wheels that you have to take out. Those are a little bit of a nuisance to get to, because there's no direct access, but you have to get up here under the wheel, try and get in. So here's the speaker, battery compartment, front axle. And like I said, this is probably not going to come off happily. Most dangerous kind of screwdriver. Try and get those apart later. The battery cables, they tie them all up. Some of them are just tied, some of them are tied and then screwed down like this one. but there's some stress relief on them, not just wired straight through. It's not too bad. And I've noticed some of the solder joints are a little iffy, especially on some of the motors. This one looks better, but its LEDs are just hanging on by a thread there. Not meant to be taken apart and messed with, so if you do, definitely check the solder joints before you close it all up. Just a regular switch on that board. So here's the board. I'll try and get a good close-up of that. Antenna, crystal marked 12, so I'm guessing that's 12 megahertz. Pair of electrolytics. They do have a couple electrolytics on each of these boards. Not as much decoupling as I would like, but a few here and there. This one has quite a few resistors, and it looks like a voltage regulator based on the fact that this says 3.3 volts. I think they have a regulator on here for, let's see, so these are LEDs, so they might actually have a couple LED drivers as well as motor drivers, because there's 3 motors in this, so I think they might be using the same. Let me get the other board to compare. They flipped the dual driver and the single driver, but otherwise I think this is a similar topology. Here's the controller and then the drivers, and then it looks like another pair of drivers over here for probably the LEDs, but I'm sort of guessing based on what that was plugged into. Front, back, right, left. It says KG, KR, KL. So this is going to be your right and left, and then this might be the cab rotation, a speaker, LEDs, UD, so I'm guessing that's up and down, back LEDs, front LEDs, front, back, up, down, right, left. Just not sure what KG is. Cab gears, don't know. Speaker, it's a small 8 ohm, half watt. In fine shape, has a little speaker paper on it. That is about all there is to it. To take these wheels apart, I don't think I'll be pulling the rear gearbox apart, like I said, but I will take this one apart, or at least try and take the motor off and see what we can see. These two should let me take the motor off, but I don't know how the motor is attached to the gears, so that is definitely going to matter. Okay, so that's a gearbox in there. Another ceramic on this motor, and this is, looks like it says 130, it's a 190S, 13250, 36 plus DV. I'm guessing it's either 36 volt or just 6 volt. But unclear exactly what RPM it is. It could be a 13250. I guess 190S does not make a whole lot of sense as a speed. Maybe it does. You could hear some gears spinning in there, so that actually is probably geared down a few times. just think of probably, these gears are in good shape. Likely to keep this. I might still put a servo in there, might not, but I can't backdrive this at all, so that's a good sign. These green top motors are not the best. I have some others that are a little bit more powerful. Swap that out. Just pull the gear off and put it on a different motor. That is easy enough to swap out. I like how they did this. It just clips back on, and then some of these innumerable screws would go in there. Probably these longer ones. Or maybe regular ones. Who knows? I suppose I should figure that out if I'm going to keep this one, huh? And get a couple of screws back in here just to keep it from completely falling apart. But pretty good design overall, except the wheels. It's just not able to put the power down. If you make power, you can turn, you can lift, but you just can't put the power down onto the ground. So, anyways, once I get this mess out of the way and a few more hours of printing, we'll have two of these. Actually, let me bring this back in the shop. So line this up. So this makes up the back, sort of clamshells together like that. So once all of the gearboxes are out of the way, there's plenty of room to mess around in here. This one fits in here, so I'm going to reuse this whole section for either this section will either be for the motor drivers or for the axle mount. This is going to sit roughly like so. Not sure exactly how low I'll have to put it to get good rotation. I don't want too much deflection, but I do want some suspension. So centered doesn't give you too much wiggle room. Bringing it sort of down and centering it here. I think that's what I'm looking for. So mark that off. Definitely going to want to put it there. Alright, scratch a little X on that. Yeah, so that's going to sit like that. It will give the back a little bit of a lift, so I'm going to have to do the same on the front. Looks like this is probably about an inch and a half, an inch and a quarter lift. So to scale, like a 2-foot lift, 24-inch lift. Maybe I'll bring that up a little bit. Just let it rock slightly. Either way, I can bring the wires in through here. I don't think I'll have to poke too many holes in the bottom, so that's nice. The linear actuator should also fit pretty nicely. I wish I could embed this. That would require cutting out quite a lot of the structure in the middle here. Don't know if that would be sturdy enough afterwards, but embedding it somewhere up a little bit would maybe improve the angle. Make sure I didn't miss anything, but I think that about wraps it up. This whole bit here is still stuck. Even though the screw's out. But, yeah, so there's a gap here. Put something through. A gap here. Probably run the wires for the actuator up through one of those. And then I'm going to put a pad on that so it doesn't come down quite so hard. The cab itself, I am going to take off the top see what kind of access there is through the bottom of this. It's possible to get some lights wired up through here. So if that is the case, let's see. These would not be the best spot to put in lights, but I might put a pair of lights on the tippy top. Or at the very least a rotating orange beacon. Gotta make sure these are OSHA compliant. There's a fair chance that they're using this other cable hold to hold the cab on as well. So that would give it 4 points of contact. It doesn't seem like it's it. Alright. Just gonna keep undoing screws until it falls apart. So that comes off like that. That does not appear to have anything to do with the cab. How the hell do you get that off? Oh, okay, so there's a clip underneath. It's clipped on. And those are not going to be easy to get out. Inner piece puts tension onto the black part in the middle, so this is being held in from both sides. That's going to be a nuisance. Alright, well, in the interest of not throwing things around or damaging anything at the moment, I'm just going to do this last screw out of spite and then probably leave it there. I don't think the cab is going to come off without causing some kind of mayhem. Finger hole there, some kind of hole back here. Looks like that comes up under the chair, so potentially some access for lighting. You'd have to get the cab off if you want to put any kind of figures in here, anything like that. Strain relief on the cables. Halfway decent electronics. Still not sure what the chip they're using as the controller is. This one looks like it might have the numbers. So based on the location in the middle, assuming this is the controller, this says a RF 2420 2052H. RF designation, an RF24, this is a 2.4 gig system. There's a fair chance that that is a specialized receiver that just takes in 2.4 gig and puts it out onto logic pins. Got, see if I can see the numbers on this. Pretty sure that's a low dropout. It's a 6209 2035/33. It's a 3.3 volt regulator, and about half of these resistors are 0 ohm. Quite a few 0 ohm links. I noticed that on the other one. It's a single-sided PCB, so if they need to jump anything, they'd use a 0 ohm SMD link. Antenna over here. I'll have to look up the rest of these chips. I can't read those right now, but Nothing too unusual about the setup. A lot of screws to clean up, but yeah. So that's a teardown of the Huina 1568 articulated dump truck. The Diecast Masters has one based on the Cat 754, I believe. Now I'm going to have to figure out how to put it back together. So, thanks for hanging out. See y'all later.